The registration hall of Vale's station smelled like ozone and wet fur, and the particular brand of institutional despair common to every bureaucratic waiting room in the known galaxy. Delegate Yora of the Sulin Collective was the first to notice the human. She noticed him the way one notices a pebble at the base of a mountain briefly, with mild curiosity, and then with amusement. He was standing at the far end of the arrivals corridor, holding a battered duffel bag and squinting at the overhead signage as though the letters personally offended him. He was short. Remarkably, almost impressively short, even by human standards, which Yora understood were already underwhelming. This one was small. His head reached perhaps the shoulder of the average Sulan delegate. He had a sharp, angular face, dark hair that had clearly been combed with something other than a comb, and the kind of calm, watchful eyes that could belong either to someone very wise or to someone who had simply learned to look like they knew what they were doing. He wore no delegate sash, no rank indicators, not even a conference lanyard, just a plain gray shirt, work trousers, and boots that had seen better geological eras. Yora leaned toward her aide. Pellis, is that one lost? Pellis checked his datapad. His badge reads J10, human, registered as an independent observer. An observer. Yora blinked her 3 outer eyes in sequence, the Sulan equivalent of a raised eyebrow. They sent an observer? To the Conclave of Species? The Conclave of Species was, by any reasonable measure, the most significant diplomatic gathering in 60 years. Representatives from 41 recognized civilizations. It was where territorial disputes got resolved, resource treaties got signed, and the future shape of the Outer Rim got quietly decided by people with very large ships and very expensive chairs. And the humans had sent one small man with a duffel bag. Word spread quickly, the way it does in rooms full of people who have nothing better to do than talk about other people. Within the hour, J10 had become the unofficial entertainment of the pre-session reception. He was pointed at, whispered about, and on at least 2 occasions openly laughed at once by a pair of Dravaki counselors who were not especially bothered about being subtle. J1 noticed. He always noticed. He just collected his glass of water, found a corner with a decent sightline, and watched the room with those quiet, patient eyes. The first session began badly for him, in the way that was almost scripted. He had been assigned a seat in the observer gallery, a tiered row above and behind the main floor, separated by a decorative railing that, in Yora's private opinion, might as well have been a sign reading times not important. When he tried to approach the main floor to examine one of the projected resource maps, a Dravaki security officer blocked him with casual authority. "Observers remain in the gallery," the officer said, not looking at him. "The map is incorrect," J1 said simply. "Observers remain in the gallery." J1 looked at the officer, then at the map. Then he went back to his gallery seat, pulled out a battered notebook, an actual paper notebook, which caused a fresh ripple of amusement, and began writing. 3 sessions passed. He wrote, he watched, he ate the provided meals without complaint, even when the catering droids accidentally classified him as Tholuvian and delivered something that smelled strongly of fermented kelp. He attended every briefing. He asked no questions. He made no speeches. The delegations largely forgot he existed. It was on the 4th day that the Times Kethvara Times arrived. The room changed when they entered. That was the only way to describe it. The air shifted. Conversations died. Delegates who had been in mid-sentence simply stopped, the words evaporating from their mouths before they could finish them. The Kethvara were the oldest spacefaring civilization currently in contact with the Conclave. They were also, without meaningful competition, the most physically imposing species in the room. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, built along the lines of something that evolution had designed, with the specific intention of being the last thing other things saw. Their exoskeletal plating was deep amber. Their manipulator arms ended in recurved structures that were technically classified as natural tools in diplomatic documentation, and "please never touch me with those" in the private thoughts of everyone else. They moved with the heavy, unhurried grace of things that had never needed to be quick because nothing had ever made them run. Their lead delegate was Elder Shovaketh. She was ancient even by Kethvara reckoning, her plating worn to a pale gold at the joints, her posture carrying the specific quality of weight that comes not from aggression, but from absolute certainty. She crossed the main floor toward the resource table, and the crowd parted before her, the way water parts before something very large and very unconcerned. She stopped. She was looking at the gallery. More precisely, she was looking at the small human in the corner of the gallery, who had set down his notebook and was looking back at her with exactly the same calm, watchful expression he'd worn for 4 days. Shovaketh made a sound, deep, resonant, structured in harmonics that the translation systems required a full 3 seconds to process. What came out, in standard, was, "Little brother." How? The room did not go quiet. It had already been quiet. What it did was become a different kind of quiet, the kind that has weight, that presses against the ears. J1 set down his glass of water. He stood, crossed the gallery, descended the stairs, and walked across the main floor to stand before Shovaketh. He was even more visually striking, in contrast barely chest height on her. The top of his head came to her second joint. He placed his right hand, palm flat, against her foremost plating. She lowered her head until it was level with his. The translation systems rendered her next words as, "You have grown since Kethmoran in the ways that matter." J1's expression did not change much, but something in his eyes did. "Elder Shovaketh," he said quietly, "I was hoping you would be here." Later, Yora would piece together what she had failed to understand. J1O was not a diplomat. He was not a bureaucrat. He was a xenobiologist who had spent 11 years on Kethmoran, a remote Kethvara colony world, studying the deep ocean ecosystems of its northern seas. 11 years. He had lived alongside Kethvara researchers, eaten their food, learned their harmonic language to a functional degree, and at some point during a particularly dangerous research expedition involving a collapsing ice shelf, he had pulled a young Kethvara scholar out of 60 meters of freezing water. The Kethvara did not forget things like that. They also did not forget the map correction he had written in his notebook on day 1, a document which, through channels Yora did not entirely follow, had made its way to Shovaketh's aides the previous evening. It outlined a surveying error in the Outer Rim territorial data that would have, if left uncorrected, given 3 delegations false grounds for a resource dispute that could have dragged on for decades. He knew about the error before he arrived, Pellis said, reading from his datapad with the expression of someone recalculating everything. He documented it from the public survey files 2 weeks before the conclave. He came here specifically to correct it, but he had no floor access. So he wrote it up, and Pellis paused. He slid it under Shovaketh's suite door. Yora stared at him. He slid it under her door. At roughly 0300 station time. Why didn't he just petition for floor access? Raise the issue formally? Pellis looked at her. He's an observer. There it was. The thing Yora had not thought about, because she had been too busy being amused. J10 had come to this conclave with no rank, no sash, no authority, and no official voice. He had known that before he arrived, and he had done what needed doing anyway, through the only channel available to him, a piece of paper and a crack under a door. On the main floor below, Shovaketh was speaking. She had called for the resource map to be revised before any further sessions proceeded, citing new data. She did not name her source. J1 was back in the observer gallery. He had his notebook open again. He was writing. He did not look triumphant. He did not look vindicated. He looked, Yora realized, exactly as he had looked from the moment he arrived, like a man who had come here to do a job and was doing it. The Drevaki counselors who had laughed at him on the first day were very quiet now. The resource map behind the main table was being corrected, line by line, according to the calculations in a paper notebook held by a small human in a corner of the gallery that everyone had decided, quite confidently, did not matter. Yora picked up her own notepad. She started writing down his name.